Hey, I'm Tommy Ellison, and this is Senior Moments. I can't tell you what I had for breakfast this morning, but I remember every detail of that time I came this close to being suspended my senior year in high school, just 3 weeks before graduation. So stick around. This is proof that some things from a misspent youth just don't fade away. Let's go. Well, hey guys, Tommy Ellison here, and welcome to Senior Moments. It's not 5 at live, it's live at 5. It's Sunday afternoon, and welcome to my podcast, and I really appreciate you joining me. And if you're not here live with me, then I certainly appreciate your watching on the replay on both YouTube and Facebook. It's been kind of an unusual week, and I guess maybe the easiest way to get into this story is the episode name is the Rocket Men of Fairfield, and I'll clear that up a little bit for you in just a minute. But this past 4th of July, last week I guess it was, I was reminded of just how much people love fireworks. And I don't know about you and where you live, but I live in a kind of a residential neighborhood, and for whatever reason, this year on the 4th of July, everybody had their fireworks going, and we've actually had 2 or 3 fireworks stands open up within probably a mile and a half of our home here, so I guess that was probably made it easy for folks to go buy their fireworks and stuff. And so, but they were shooting off these things well into the evening on July the 4th. 11 midnight, they were still shooting off their fireworks. And of course, I'm not innocent of doing those. I haven't done them recently. When my girls were little, we always did it. But just the sheer amount and variety of fireworks that were being shot, made it feel like I was living inside of a grand finale of a big fireworks show. That was just all over the surrounding area here. They were shooting them off, and they were loud, and they were impressive. And, well, it triggered a memory I once had. Well, I hadn't thought about it in years, to be honest with me. And you've got to go back with me when we do this memory, because we got to go back to my elementary school days. And you got to meet my buddy. One of my childhood friends at St. Anthony's was a fellow by the name of Jimmy Imhof. And Jimmy's still with us today. He's on Facebook, and I'm sure if he's watching or if he hears about this, he'll be sure and chime in the comments. He can validate whether this was true or not, or if I'm just embellishing the truth. But Jimmy, and excuse me while I cough, Jimmy lived in Inslee, Alabama, which is adjacent to Fairfield if you're watching this from some foreign land like Mississippi or someplace. And we both attended St. Anthony's Catholic School there in Inslee. And yes, that's the same school I ran away from in a previous episode. But this is a different story. And I was looking up the definition. In my title, I talk about the evidence of a misspent youth, and I was looking up the definition of the word mischievous, and it reads something like this: mischievous is an adjective, and it means causing or showing a fondness for causing trouble in a playful way. And that's kind of, I guess we were mischievous young men back in those days. And we were there at the school there in Inslee at St. Anthony's. And, and you got to also remember, this is like 1960, 61, maybe 62. The United States was really just kind of ramping up the research for space. If you remember the name Werner von Braun, he was one of the gentleman who came from Germany in their rocket program and made his home in Huntsville, where they were developing the Saturn rocket for the inevitable launch of man into space. And so, being kids, we go through these stages. I think every kid goes through the dinosaur stage. And back then, every kid kind of went through the space stage. And there were a lot of science fiction movies, that just fueled the imagination of us. And Jimmy and I, we kind of felt like we were, well, the young Warner von Brauns of Fairfield, Alabama. And, well, here's the deal. We found out the secret, the recipe for making our own gunpowder. And I don't know where we found it, to be honest with you. But and I'm not going to give you the actual recipe because, well, I wouldn't want to do that. But we had a secret recipe that we used, and it was after much trial and error that we developed these ratios of the components. And I don't want to get flagged on YouTube or Facebook, but it involved sulfur, charcoal, and a curious little powder called saltpeter. And believe it or not, we found a tiny little Italian grocery store in Inslee that sold saltpeter in little small boxes for like a nickel a box. It was incredibly cheap. And saltpeter sounded to us like something from a wizard's spell book, maybe one shelf over from the powdered bat wings or the eye of newt. But saltpeter is actually a real thing. It's a white powdery substance, and it's the technical name for it is potassium nitrate. I don't know really what it was used for, but someone told me that it had something to do with curing meats and like ham and bacon to help preserve them. And farmers sometimes use it as a fertilizer to help plants grow. And of course, nitrates, I think, are what's used in the soil even today. But Jimmy and I weren't interested in farming or meat preserving. We were making rocket fuel. And saltpeter, as it turned out, is the key oxidizer in gunpowder, the stuff that goes boom. Well, looking back, it makes you wonder why any grocery store would sell it to two Catholic school kids with a sparkle in their eye and a box of matches in their pocket. But after a long trial and error, we figured out the right proportions, and it burned just right, a flammable, potent explosive. But to us, it was rocket fuel. And in our minds, it was the same stuff inside, real fireworks. And now, by knowing what was the composition of gunpowder, we were, of course, in business. Now, Jimmy's dad worked as a chemist at U.S. Steel. He's got a comment here. Oh, my sister from New Jersey says it's for preserving meat. Yep, you're right, Anna. That's exactly probably one of the legitimate uses for it. But in our case, we had more nefarious things in mind. And anyway, what I was about to say was Jimmy's dad worked as a chemist at U.S. Steel. And Jimmy, one day, he brought home a box of stuff that his dad had brought home, rather. And it was kind of an odd-looking lab equipment. And there were these little fireproof cylinders. They were had a closed end, kind of a rounded nose, but it was open on one end. And it was, I'm not sure what it was made of. It might have been made out of asbestos because it was fireproof. And I think what they used them for was they would put that little asbestos cylinder with the open side up, and they would put glass test tubes in it, and then the Bunsen burners underneath the cylinder would heat up the cylinder, and of course, being asbestos, it wouldn't burn it but it would allow them to heat up the contents of the test tube without necessarily burning the test tube itself. And it wasn't quite like a well, it might have been called a crucible. I'm not sure about that, Anna. She just popped in here, and this is my sister, who is a lot smarter than I am, and she said it was a crucible. I don't know. She's well, no, dear, I would never want you to shut up. I've never told you that in my life. But anyway, these tubes, we realized, were kind of, well, let's just say enlarged sizes that we could probably utilize in making a rocket. Now, we also figured out that in order to have this little short tube fly properly, we would have to use a stabilizer, like a piece of stick, and we found some straight sticks and cut them to length, and glued them to the side. So if you can picture a bottle rocket, you'll know a bottle rocket has a little stick that enables it to fly in a straight up path. It's kind of like a stabilizer. And so we would glue it to the side, these sticks to the side, to make sure that our rockets, if they ever flew, would fly straight. I mean, we figured that much out just on our own, and by owning a few bottle rockets. Well, our launch pad, you ask, was an old metal bed rail, and it had a slot in the middle. It was about, 5 foot long, and we would prop it up in the alley at the proper trajectory. And so the tube and the stabilizer stick, the whole mechanism, we would put in that rail, and so that would kind of guide the rocket off in the right direction. And I guess the question might be, well, what about the fuse? Well, thanks to Jimmy's dad, who again worked at the steel mill, and I guess in the chemistry lab, he had access to a lot of this stuff. He had what was known as dynamite fuse. And this kind of fuse, if you see the movies where the fuse for dynamite is sparkling, almost like a sparkler, and burning and burning down to the point of igniting whatever it was stuck in. Well, dynamite fuse was a little different, because when you lit it on the end, it would kind of spit fire out for a second, and then the fire would actually run on the inside of the fuse, and you could see the fuse melting from the heat of that internal fire, but you had to watch it and see exactly where the fire was on that length of fuse, and you could tell about how much time you had left. And so we had some of this dynamite fuse, fortunately. And, like I said, you couldn't see the flame, but you had to watch the outer skin and watch it melt in order to kind of determine, well, where am I going with this story? Well, the first launch that we had was in our alley behind our house, my house, family's house in Fairfield. And we lit the fuse, and we stepped back thinking, it would probably spit fire out the bottom of it and, fall 10, 15 feet down the alley. Well, instead, it shot off like a bullet, and it arched through the air, down the alley, across the cross alley, and landed squarely on a neighbor's roof. Now, luckily for us, those asbestos casings kind of kept it from catching fire, and it fizzled out harmlessly. But for a few moments there, we were trying to find a hole to dig and get in, or perhaps run, flee the neighborhood, and because we thought, like, oh my gosh, we're going to burn that guy's house down. And of course, we never tried to get it back. No point in, leaving fingerprints on what could have been Exhibit A. So it stayed on that roof for however long. I don't know, probably first rain. But we started refining our methods. And we figured out that if we took those three components of the gunpowder and mixed them together thoroughly, and we were using the charcoal briquettes from, barbecue briquettes, and busting them up and grinding it into a fine dust and mixing it with the sulfur and the saltpeter. And we would wet it with water and make a kind of a slurry mix of the gunpowder composition. And then we would pour it into those shells. And then we'd take a glass rod, like a stirring rod in a chemistry lab, and we would insert it down the middle of that canister, that little, for us it was the body of the rocket. We would insert it into the bottle of the rocket and actually displace the gunpowder that was in the middle to the sides. And so it created an air shaft that enabled the gunpowder to burn quicker, because it didn't burn in a layer. It actually ignited the whole thing at one time. We were pretty clever. We didn't know how smart we were. In fact, if you measure how dumb we were versus how smart we were to be doing all this, we still were pretty darn dumb. But anyway, that air shaft was the key. It let the burn travel evenly through the whole rocket. I mean, this was science. This was, well, kind of science. And we were very proud of ourselves. I mean, we were in the rocket business. We were the rocket men of Fairfield. And then one day we said, you know what? Maybe we should make a bigger rocket, a mega rocket, something that could really fly a long way. And we had this cardboard mailing tube that was about 2.5 inches in diameter, about 12 inches long. And we took plaster of Paris and we sealed one end of it. Jimmy knew how to mix it up. Don't ask me how. I think maybe his mom did flower pots or something with it. But anyway, we sealed up the end with plaster of Paris. And we spent literally weeks gathering enough saltpeter and sulfur and charcoal and grinding it all up to fill up this giant mega rocket that we were making. And all along thinking, man, this is going to be a really big deal. Well, we figured it was heavy enough to fly straight on its own, so we didn't need a stabilizer. I'm not sure how we came up with that conclusion, but it seemed to make sense at the time. And so, again, we went back to our favorite launching site in the alley behind our house on Hillside Drive. We set up our bed rail, and, well, I'm sorry, it wasn't a bed rail, it was a launching pad. And this time we aimed it straight up the alley, so we had a clear path going all the way down the alley, maybe 2 or 3 blocks before there was any type of obstruction like someone's house. And we inserted that long fuse all the way up into the inside of that giant mega rocket, and we lit the fuse. We backed away, 15, 20 feet, and we waited. And then I noticed the launch pad, the bed rail, had moved a little bit under the workings of trying to get everything set up. And as I was looking down the trajectory of that launching pad, I noticed that it kind of tended to go at an angle, and I'm thinking, you know what, if this thing goes off in a straight line, it's going to hit a house on the side of that alley about 1.5 blocks up. So I carefully walked up to it to adjust it, and that's when it happened. I knew that I had a little bit of fuse left, but I was trying to get the rail just right. Good intentions. But you know what they say about good intentions. And the rocket exploded right there on the launching pad. It never made it off the launching pad. It was loud and it was unexpected. And a big old chunk of plaster of Paris hit me in the head, didn't break the skin, just kind of glanced off of me. But it was loud enough to make my ears ring for a week. Now, there was no blood, just that ringing stuck in my ears. And I have to tell you, years later, it came up during a hearing test I was taking as I aged. And the audiologist asked me, said, have you ever been near a giant explosion? And I said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I have. Now, I've also done a lot of hunting with my dad, and we've been around shooting shotguns and things. And back then, you didn't wear earplugs or ear protection when you hunted. You just went out and shot the shotguns. But there was this one time in the back alley, sir, where and a buddy of mine made a rocket, and I don't know if that was the he called it a report, the loud report that kind of blew out the middle range of my hearing, not completely, but certainly damaged, because I still experience that today, even with the hearing aids that I wear now. But it kind of maybe explained what he was seeing on the graph of the hearing test. And my mind went right back to that alley, to that launch, and to that blast and that piece of plaster of Paris in my head. Now, these days, I wear hearing aids, and I got a good deal at Costco. And by the way, they're not a sponsor of this. It could be. Costco, if you're watching, you can be a sponsor. But if you're in the market for hearing aids, I would recommend them. And there's a setting on their app that talks to their hearing aids where you can change the direction of the microphone that's picking up your sounds that you're listening to. And so you can actually make it listen on a 360, or you can kind of divert it around to a 180 hearing range, or you can actually divert it to go straight ahead about 30 or 40 degrees. My wife tells me I've developed a talent for, tuning out the sound of her voice. I'm working on it, but the hearing aids don't seem to help with that. And they don't block out things like take out the trash and we need a new dishwasher, or did you forget the eggs again? And not quite there yet, but I'm hoping. But nevertheless, thinking about all this, and Jimmy Imhof, saltpeter and charcoal and sulfur and making rockets and pretending we were involved in the space race, brought back a senior moment for me this week, listening to all these fireworks. Listen, I want you to come back next week. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next Sunday, live at 5, for more stories from the vault and the evidence of a misspent youth. Tell your friends, and we hope to see you then. Take care. Have a great Sunday evening. Well, hey, thanks for spending a few minutes with me on Senior Moments. If you enjoyed the ride, be sure and tap that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. I'll be back soon with more stories from a misspent youth, and maybe some of yours too.